About 2,300 years ago, the world was divided between two colossal superpowers. In the east, stretching from the sands of modern-day Balochistan to the shores of the Mediterranean and down into Egypt, stood the mighty Iranian Achaemenid Empire. And in the west, the rising force of Europe, the Macedonian Empire, forged into a formidable power by its king, Emperor Philip. His ambition was vast, and nearly all of the known world was in his sights. In fact, only two stubborn Greek city-states remained independent, Sparta and Athens. To finally bring them to heel, Philip built a terrifying new army. He specifically selected soldiers for their great height, creating a phalanx that could tear through enemy ranks with ease. But history had other plans. In 336 BC, tragedy struck. Emperor Philip was assassinated, stabbed to death by his own bodyguard. The crown passed to his young son, Alexander III, a name you might know better as Alexander the Great. Alexander was determined to conquer Iran and fulfill his father's dream, but his position was still weak. He needed a sign, a prophecy, to solidify his power and inspire his men. In Greece, there was a famous oracle, a priestess at the Temple of Apollo, who was said to communicate directly with the god and see the future. Her prophecies held immense power in Greek society. Alexander demanded a meeting. The oracle refused. But Alexander was not a man who accepted no for an answer. He marched into the temple, grabbed the priestess by the arm, and dragged her outside. Trembling, she looked at him and declared, "Alexander, you are unconquerable. No one can defeat you." That was all he needed to hear. He released her and said, "I need no other prophecy." That sentence, those words are enough. With his destiny confirmed, he gathered his army and set out for the first part of the Iranian Empire, what we now call Turkey. His target was a province guarded by 40,000 cavalry. It was the year 334 BC. The Iranian Emperor Darius got word of the invasion, but instead of sending his main army, he left the defense to his local governor. The Greeks crossed the straits and entered Asia Minor. Days later, Alexander fought his first major battle against the Iranians on the banks of the Granicus River. The Iranians waited on one side of the river. Alexander and his personal companions did the unthinkable. They charged directly into the water, holding their shields high against a storm of arrows. They fought their way to the opposite bank, creating a bridgehead for the rest of the Greek army to cross and swarm the enemy. During the brutal fighting, a moment of crisis, Alexander was dueling one Iranian commander when a second crept up from behind and swung a battle axe at his head. The axe shattered his helmet and sheared through his hair, but miraculously left his skull intact. As the commander raised his axe for a killing blow, one of Alexander's friends cut him down. Alexander had cheated death by inches, and in return, he killed the other commander with his own hands. With their leaders dead, the Iranian army broke and ran. The road east was now open. As Alexander marched down the coast, he came to the city of Gordium. There he found an ancient chariot tied to a post with a knot so complex, no ends were visible. Legend said whoever untied it would rule all of Asia. Alexander simply drew his sword and sliced the knot in half. Another prophecy fulfilled. And while Alexander was receiving these divine encouragements, his enemy, Emperor Darius, was having dreams. He dreamed of the Greek army surrounded by fire, and of Alexander entering a Persian temple, never to return. His court interpreters, eager to please, told him it meant he would crush Alexander and destroy his army. Overjoyed, Darius decided to lead his massive army himself to teach this upstart a lesson. But a voice of reason spoke up. A brilliant Greek mercenary general in his service, named Cardamas, warned him, "Your Majesty, do not go yourself. Send me. If you fall, the entire empire falls with you." Darius took this not as wise counsel, but as an insult from a foreigner. In a fit of rage, he ordered Charidemus executed. As he was dragged away, the general screamed, "This is injustice, tyranny. You will pay for this." And pay for it he would. Darius assembled his grand army at Babylon and began his march. Alexander, with a much smaller force of 30,000, was waiting in Turkey. He received faulty intelligence that Darius was coming from the south, so he marched towards Syria. It was a fatal mistake. Darius swung north, captured Alexander's rear supply base, and mutilated the wounded Greek soldiers left behind. He set them free as a message of terror. When those wounded men found Alexander and told their story, he was furious. He turned his army around and raced north, finally finding Darius's immense host near a town called Issus. Once again, a river separated the two armies. The geography favored Alexander, funneling Darius's vast numbers into a narrow plain between the mountains and the sea. Darius arranged his forces traditionally: cavalry on the flanks, infantry in the center, and himself in a grand chariot behind, surrounded by his 10,000 elite immortal guards. He had also sent a large force of cavalry across the river to outflank the Greeks. Alexander was clever. He mirrored the formation, but held his position. The battle began with the Iranian cavalry across the river charging the Greek flank. The Greek infantry then surged across the river and slammed into the Iranian center. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, but Alexander on the right flank held back. He was waiting. He saw the Iranian archers left undefended on his side of the river. In a brilliant move, he wheeled his cavalry, crossed the river, and charged directly into them. The archers were wiped out. Alexander then smashed into the rear of the Iranian infantry. The battle became a slaughter. At this moment of chaos, legend says Darius himself threw a dagger that wounded Alexander in the leg. But then, the unthinkable happened. Darius's own chariot horses, spooked by the carnage, threatened to bolt into the Greek lines. In a panic, his guards pulled him from his chariot, placed him on a horse, and he fled the battlefield, abandoning his army, his treasure, and even his own family. Seeing their emperor run, the entire Iranian army collapsed. When Alexander entered the royal tent, he saw unimaginable wealth. He remarked, "So, this is what it means to be a king." He allowed his men to loot the camp, but he himself treated Darius's captured wife and daughters with immense respect. Though they were famed for their beauty, Alexander kept them at a distance. He famously said, "Gold and sensual pleasure are the two things that remind me I am merely mortal." He would not be distracted from his destiny. With this stunning victory, the gates to the Levant swung open. Cities across Syria and Lebanon surrendered without a fight, all except for one, the mighty island fortress of Tyre. Confident behind their walls, they refused to surrender. So Alexander decided to do the impossible. He built a massive causeway from the mainland to the island. The Tyrians fought back fiercely, using fire ships to destroy his siege towers. But Alexander was relentless. He brought in a full fleet from Cyprus and other allies. After a brutal 7-month siege, his forces broke through the walls. The city fell in a storm of blood and fire. Next was Gaza, another fortress, another challenge. The walls were too high for his catapults, so Alexander ordered his army to build a massive earthen mound, as high as the walls themselves, and rolled his siege engines up it. The walls were breached, and Gaza suffered the same fate as Tyre. Finally, he turned to Egypt. But here's something extraordinary happened. The Egyptians, who hated their Persian rulers, welcomed Alexander as a liberator and a god. They crowned him Pharaoh, son of the sun god Ra. There at the Oracle of Siwa, he received his final confirmation. Though no one knows what was said, Alexander emerged believing he was truly the son of a god, destined for greatness. On the Mediterranean coast, he founded the great city of Alexandria, home to a lighthouse that would become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia, the pharaoh of Egypt, was now the master of the Eastern Mediterranean. His confidence was absolute. He turned his eyes east, toward the heart of the Persian Empire itself, toward lands that stretched to the ends of the known world, and toward a final epic confrontation with Darius. But a question remained. In Iran, a new challenger had risen to the throne. Who was this new king? And how would Alexander's quest for glory lead him to the distant, mysterious land of India? That is a story for next time.